The crimson glow of the dying star bathes the ship's observation deck in an eerie, flickering light. Captain Elara Voss stands alone, her reflection faint in the reinforced glass as she gazes at the collapsing celestial giant. Its surface roils with violent energy, pulling at the ship with a gravitational force that grows stronger by the minute. She glances back at the Cryopods, where her crew lies in suspended animation, unaware of the crisis unfolding around them. The power reserves are dwindling, the systems flickering like a fading heartbeat. Should she wake them, risking panic and chaos, or face the storm alone, carrying the weight of their survival on her shoulders? The star's final breaths echo in the silence, and Ellara knows her next move could mean the difference between life and death for everyone on board. This is not just a mission, it's a test of leadership, courage, and the fragile threads that bind humanity together in the vast emptiness of space. Elara's fingers dance across the control panel, her movements quick but precise as she activates the ship's diagnostic systems. The display flickers to life, casting a pale blue glow over her face. Rows of data scroll past, and her breath catches as the numbers reveal a critical power drain. The dying star's radiation is seeping into the ship's systems, siphoning energy like a relentless thief. She stares at the screen, her mind racing. Kale, her chief engineer, would know exactly how to stabilize the power grid, but the thought of waking him sends a chill through her. His temper is as unpredictable as the star outside, and in a crisis like this, his volatility could make things worse. Instead, she decides to reroute the power herself. Her hands move swiftly, rerouting conduits and bypassing failing systems, but the ship groans in protest, the vibrations reverberating through the deck beneath her feet. The strain is palpable, and for a moment, she hesitates, her fingers trembling above the controls. The weight of her decision presses down on her. She's chosen to shoulder this burden alone, but the reality of it is far heavier than she anticipated. The ship can't hold out like this forever, and neither can she. A faint alarm pierces the silence, barely audible at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It's coming from the Cryopods. Elara's head snaps toward the sound, her pulse quickening. Something is wrong, something she can't ignore. The alarm is a warning, a signal that the systems are failing in ways she can't predict. Her isolation, her choice to act alone, suddenly feels more like a trap than a solution. The star's crimson light flickers through the observation deck, casting long shadows that seem to close in around her. She knows now that time is running out, and the decisions she makes in the next moments will determine whether they survive or are lost forever to the void. Ellara moves toward the Cryopods, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor, each step echoing the urgency of the situation. The alarm grows louder, a shrill reminder of the systems unraveling around her. She reaches Kale's pod first, her heart sinking as the display flashes erratic readings. His vitals are unstable, his life signs flickering like a candle in the wind. The pod's internal temperature is rising, and the cooling systems are failing. She hesitates for only a second before her training kicks in. She can't afford to wait. Her hands fly across the control panel, overriding the safety protocols to wake him. The pod hisses as it releases its hold, and Kale's body jerks awake, his eyes wide and unfocused. He stumbles out, disoriented, his voice ragged as he demands answers. What the hell is going on? His words are sharp, laced with anger and confusion. Ellara steps back, giving him space, but he doesn't wait for her reply. "You let this happen," he snaps, his tone cutting through the air like a blade. "You left us in the dark while everything fell apart." His accusation hangs between them, heavy and unrelenting. Ellara meets his gaze, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "The star is collapsing, Kale. The ship's systems are failing, and I didn't have a choice." She explains the gravity of their situation, the power drain, the radiation seeping into the ship's core. Her words are measured, but there's no hiding the urgency in her tone. Kale listens, his jaw clenched, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Yet as the reality of their predicament sinks in, his expression shifts, less accusatory, more calculating. Despite the tension, they both know they need each other. Kale's expertise is unmatched, and Elara's leadership is the only thing holding them together. He moves to the pod's control panel, his hands moving with practiced precision as he works to stabilize the failing systems. The silence between them is thick, charged with unspoken words and unresolved grievances. But for now, survival takes precedence. As they work side by side, the ship lurches violently, throwing them both off balance. Alarms blare anew, and the crimson light of the dying star outside flickers wildly. Kale grabs the edge of the console to steady himself, his eyes narrowing as he scans the readings. "Something's wrong with the engines," he mutters, his voice tight. "We're losing propulsion." The words hang in the air, a new threat rising to meet them. Ellara feels the weight of it all pressing down, but there's no time to falter. Together, they brace for what comes next, the tension between them momentarily eclipsed by the urgency of their shared fight for survival. The ship's sensors suddenly blare a sharp, insistent tone, cutting through the tense silence. Elara's eyes dart to the console, where a cascade of red warnings floods the screen. A massive solar flare, far larger than anything they've encountered before, is hurtling toward them. The readings are unmistakable. This isn't just a burst of energy. It's a tidal wave of destruction, capable of tearing through their shields and frying the ship's delicate systems. Kale leans over the console, his brow furrowed as he processes the data. "We've got minutes at best," he mutters, his voice tight with urgency. "If we don't reinforce the shields now, that flare will cook us alive." Elara's mind races as she considers their options. The shields are already strained, barely holding against the star's relentless radiation. Reinforcing them will require every ounce of power the ship can spare, and even then, it might not be enough. Kale turns to her, his expression grim. "We need to wake the others," he says, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This isn't a one-person job, Ellara. We need all hands on deck." Her jaw tightens at the suggestion. She's spent years honing her ability to lead, to make the hard calls alone. The thought of waking the crew, of facing their fear and confusion, feels like relinquishing control. "They'll panic," she counters, her voice low but firm. "We don't have time to manage chaos right now." Kale steps closer, his eyes locking with hers. and we don't have time to argue, he fires back. You can't do this by yourself. None of us can. If we don't work together, we're done for. His words hang in the air, heavy and unyielding. For a moment, the tension between them is palpable, a clash of leadership styles and philosophies. But as the seconds tick by, Ellara knows he's right. Reluctantly, she nods, her voice barely above a whisper. Wake them. The cryopods hiss open one by one, and the crew emerges, disoriented and groggy. Their eyes widen as they take in the crimson light of the dying star. Through the observation deck, the flashing alarms, and the grim expressions on Ellara and Kale's faces. The reality of their situation hits them hard. This isn't a routine mission anymore. They are in a fight for survival, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Ellara steps forward, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside her. We've got a solar flare incoming, she explains, her words clear and direct. We need to reinforce the shields immediately. Kale will guide you through the technical adjustments, but we need everyone focused. No mistakes. The crew nods, their fear giving way to determination as they move into action. Kale takes charge of the engineering team, barking orders and directing them to critical systems. Ellara watches from the command console, her eyes flicking between the approaching flare and the crew's progress. The tension between her and Kale lingers, unspoken but undeniable. She values control, order, and precision. He thrives on collaboration, adaptability, and trust. Their differences are a source of friction, but in this moment, they are also their greatest strength. As the crew works feverishly to reinforce the shields, the ship shudders under the growing pressure of the star's gravitational pull. The flare looms closer, its menacing glow visible even through the reinforced glass. Elara's hands tighten on the console, her focus unwavering. She knows this is their moment, their chance to prove that even in the face of impossible odds, humanity can endure. But as the flare draws nearer, the question lingers. Will their unity be enough to save them, or will the star's fury prove too much to overcome? The ship's corridors hum with urgency as the crew scrambles to reinforce the shields, their movements a chaotic symphony of desperation and determination. Voices overlap, sharp and urgent, as technicians shout updates and engineers wrestle with failing systems. Ellara stands at the heart of it all, her presence a steadying force as she directs the chaos. Focus on the shields, she commands, her voice cutting through the noise. Every second counts. The crew obeys, their hands flying across control panels and their eyes locked on the flickering displays. But Kale isn't satisfied. He strides toward her, his expression fierce. This isn't enough, he says, his tone edged with frustration. The shields won't hold against that flare, not in their current state. We need another option. His words hang in the air, drawing the attention of the nearby crew. He gestures toward the observation deck, where the dying star looms like a monstrous eye. The star's gravity, we can use it. If we reroute power to the engines, we can slingshot around it and buy ourselves more time. Elara's jaw tightens. She knows the risks of his plan. The maneuver would push the ship to its limits, and one miscalculation could send them spiraling into the star's crushing embrace. It's too dangerous, she counters, her voice firm. We don't have the margin for error. The shields are our best chance. Kale steps closer, his frustration boiling over. Our best chance. The shields are barely holding as it is. If we don't try something bold, we're dead either way. His words echo through the deck, and the crew pauses, their eyes darting between the two leaders. The tension is palpable, a rift forming in the fragile unity they've built. Ellara feels the weight of their stares, the pressure of their fear. She's always led with certainty, with clarity, but now doubt creeps in. Kale's plan is reckless, but it's also their only alternative. She glances at the crew, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear, and realizes she's no longer just making decisions for herself. She's deciding for all of them. Before she can respond, the ship shudders violently, throwing them off balance. The lights flicker, dimming to a faint glow before flaring back to life. The flare is closer now, its searing light casting long, jagged shadows across the deck. The crew's fear becomes palpable, their breaths quick and shallow as they wait for her next move. Ellara closes her eyes for a moment, her mind racing. She could assert her authority, demand they follow her plan, and hope the shields hold. Or she could trust Kale, take a leap into the unknown, and risk everything on a gamble. The weight of the decision presses down on her, heavier than the star's gravity. She knows this moment will define her leadership, not just to the crew, but to herself. When she opens her eyes, her gaze meets Kale's. There's no anger in his expression now, only resolve. She nods, her voice steady but quiet. We'll try it your way. But if this goes wrong, it's on both of us. Kale exhales sharply, his relief evident, but there's no time for celebration. He turns to the crew, barking orders as they reroute power to the engines. The ship groans under the strain, its systems protesting the sudden shift in energy. Ellara watches from the command console, her hands gripping the edges as the flare's light grows brighter, closer, until it fills the observation deck with a blinding, searing glow. The crew works in tense silence, their movements synchronized but hurried. Every second feels like an eternity, every breath a gamble. Elara's heart pounds in her chest, but she forces herself to remain calm, to project the confidence her crew needs. The ship lurches again, and for a moment, the world seems to tilt on its axis. Then, with a deafening roar, the engines surge to life, propelling them forward. The ship hurtles toward the star, its gravity pulling them in like a predator, closing in on its prey. The crew braces themselves, their faces pale but determined. Elara's voice cuts through the chaos, steady and commanding. Hold your positions, we're not done yet. The star's crimson light engulfs them, its heat searing against the ship's hull. For a moment, everything seems to stand still: the crew, the ship, even time itself. And then, with a sudden, violent jolt, the ship swings around the star, its trajectory bending sharply. The flare streaks past, missing them by a hair's breadth, its energy crackling against the shields. The crew erupts in cheers, their relief overwhelming, but Elara's gaze remains fixed on the star. They've bought themselves time, but the danger isn't over yet. She glances at Kale, who meets her eyes with a nod of acknowledgement. Their partnership, forged in the heat of crisis, has carried them this far, but the challenges ahead will test them in ways they can't yet imagine. As the ship stabilizes and the crew catches their breath, Ellara feels the weight of her decision settle over her. She's no longer just a captain. She's a leader who's willing to listen, to adapt, and to trust. And in the vast, unforgiving expanse of space, that might be the only thing that can save them. The command deck is a whirlwind of activity as the crew scrambles to execute the dual plan. Kale at the helm of the slingshot maneuver, while the rest focus on shoring up the shields. Ellara watches the chaos unfold, her hands gripping the edge of the console as she tries to maintain order. It's a precarious balance, one that pushes her leadership to its limits. She's always prided herself on control, on precision, but now she's forced to trust Kale's unorthodox approach. The decision gnaws at her, a quiet doubt that lingers beneath the surface, but she pushes it aside. There's no room for hesitation now. Kale's voice cuts through the tension, sharp and commanding, as he directs the engineering team. Reroute all non-essential power to the engines, he barks, his fingers flying across the controls. We've got one shot at this, so don't mess it up. The crew obeys without question, their movements fueled by a mix of fear and determination. Ellara steps back, allowing him the space to work, but her eyes never leave the console. She monitors the shields, her heart pounding as the flare's energy grows brighter on the sensors. The tension is palpable, a silent storm brewing in the air. When the flare hits, it feels like the ship is being torn apart. The impact sends a violent shudder through the hull, the force throwing everyone off balance. The lights flicker, and the shields groan under the strain, their energy reserves dwindling dangerously low. For a moment, it seems as though they might not hold, and Elara's breath catches in her throat. But then, just as suddenly as it began, the shuddering stops. The shields stabilize, barely intact, and the crew lets out a collective breath they didn't realize they were holding. Kale's voice breaks the silence, triumphant but strained. "We're pulling away," he announces, his eyes locked on the navigation display. The ship begins to move, its trajectory curving as the star's gravity works in their favor. The engines roar in protest, their strain evident in the creaking and groaning of the hull, but they hold. For now, the crew erupts in cheers, their relief spilling over in laughter and shouts, but Elara's attention is elsewhere. A faint warning light catches her eye, blinking ominously on the console. She leans closer, her stomach sinking as she reads the alert. The engines are overheating, their systems pushed beyond their limits. The slingshot maneuver may have saved them from the flare, but it's come at a cost. She glances at Kale, who's still focused on the navigation controls, his face a mask of concentration. Part of her wants to tell him, to share the burden of this new threat, but she hesitates. The crew is already riding a wave of relief, and she can't afford to shatter that fragile hope. Not yet. Instead, she turns back to the console, her mind racing as she considers their options. They've survived the flare, but the danger is far from over. The ship is battered, its systems strained to the breaking point, and the star's relentless pull still looms large. Ellara feels the weight of it all pressing down on her, a reminder that leadership isn't just about making the right decisions. It's about bearing the consequences of those decisions, no matter how heavy they may be. As the crew celebrates their narrow escape, Ellara quietly begins to assess the damage, her thoughts already turning to the challenges ahead. The journey isn't over, and neither is the test of her leadership. But for now, she allows herself a moment of quiet resolve, knowing that whatever comes next, she'll face it with the same determination that brought them this far. The command deck falls silent as the faint warning light on Elara's console grows brighter. Its crimson glow a stark contrast to the flickering displays around her. She doesn't need to read the diagnostics to know what it means. The engines are overheating, the core temperature climbing dangerously close to a catastrophic meltdown. Her stomach knots as she turns to the crew, her voice steady but urgent. Divert all available power to the cooling systems. Now, the words are firm, a command that leaves no room for hesitation. But before the crew can react, Kale steps forward, his expression tense. "We can't," he says, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "If we divert power, we'll lose thrust. The star's gravity will pull us back in, and we'll be worse off than before." His words hang in the air, heavy and unyielding. The crew glances between them, their faces etched with uncertainty. It's a choice between two nightmares: risk the engines failing entirely, or risk being trapped in the star's crushing embrace. Elara's jaw tightens as she weighs the options. Diverting power to the cooling systems buys them time, but at the cost of their momentum. Kale's plan is reckless, but it might be their only chance to escape the star's pull. She feels the weight of every eye on her, the unspoken question hanging in the air: which risk is greater? Her instincts scream for caution, for control, but she knows this is no time for half measures. "We stay the course," she says finally, her voice low but firm. "Keep the engines running. We'll deal with the heat once we're clear of the star." The words feel heavy as they leave her lips, a gamble that could cost them everything. Kale nods, his relief evident, but there's no time for celebration. The crew springs into action, their movements sharp and focused as they work to keep the engine stable. The ship groans under the strain, its hull vibrating with the effort of resisting the star's pull. The core temperature continues to climb, the warning lights flashing faster now, a relentless reminder of the danger they're in. Ellara watches the readings intently, her hands gripping the console, as if she can will the ship to hold together through sheer determination. The air grows thick with tension, every second stretching into what feels like an eternity. Kale moves to her side, his voice low but urgent. "We're gaining distance, but it's not enough. If we don't get more thrust soon, we'll stall out." His words are a dagger to her resolve, but she doesn't flinch. Instead, she turns to the crew, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Increase power to the engines. Push them as far as they'll go." The crew hesitates for a moment, their eyes wide with fear, but they obey. The engines roar to life, their vibrations shaking the deck beneath their feet. The ship lurches forward, its momentum building as it fights against the star's gravity. For a moment, it seems like they might actually make it. The readings show they're pulling away, the star's crimson light growing dimmer with each passing second. But the victory is short-lived. The core temperature spikes, the warning lights flashing faster now, their urgency impossible to ignore. Elara's heart pounds in her chest as she watches the numbers climb, her mind racing for a solution. The engines are their lifeline, but they're also their greatest threat. She glances at Kale, his face pale but determined, and realizes they're running out of time. The ship shudders violently, the sound of metal groaning under the strain echoing through the deck. The crew braces themselves, their faces a mix of fear and determination. Ellara feels the weight of their trust pressing down on her, a reminder that every decision she makes carries the weight of their lives. The core temperature climbs higher, the warning lights now a constant, blinding red. And then, just as it seems like they might break free, the unthinkable happens. The engines falter, their roar fading into a strained whine. The ship slows, the star's gravity pulling at them once more. Elara's breath catches in her throat as she realizes the truth. They're not out of danger yet, not even close. The core's warning lights blaze like angry fireflies, their crimson glow casting an eerie hue across the command deck. The temperature readings climb with alarming speed, each new number a stark reminder of how close they are to disaster. Elara's voice cuts through the chaos, sharp and clear. We're at critical levels. If we don't stabilize the core now, we're looking at a full meltdown. The crew moves with frantic urgency, their faces pale but determined. Kale is already at her side, his earlier frustration replaced by a focused intensity. Together, they dive into the task, their hands flying across the controls in a desperate bid to avert catastrophe. The tension between them fades, replaced by a shared purpose. Kale's expertise shines as he reroutes power and adjusts the cooling systems, his movements precise despite the urgency. Ellara coordinates the crew, her voice steady as she directs them to reinforce the core's containment field. It's a fragile balance, a race against time as the core's temperature inches closer to the breaking point. The ship groans under the strain, its systems pushed to their absolute limits. Every second feels like an eternity, every breath a gamble. Finally, with a collective effort, the core stabilizes. The temperature readings plateau, and the warning lights dim to a less menacing glow. The crew lets out a collective exhale, their relief palpable, but the victory is bittersweet. The ship's systems are battered, their energy reserves nearly depleted. The strain of the maneuver has left the hull creaking and the engines sputtering, their once reliable hum now a faint, uneven whine. Ellara surveys the damage, her expression grim. The command deck is a shadow of its former self-flickering lights, cracked consoles, and the lingering scent of burnt circuits. The crew sits slumped at their stations, their exhaustion etched into every line of their faces. Morale is dangerously low, the weight of their near-death experience pressing heavily on their spirits. She knows this is a critical moment, one that could determine whether they hold together or fall apart. Stepping forward, Ellara raises her voice, her tone firm but compassionate. "Listen up," she begins, her words cutting through the heavy silence. What we just faced wasn't just a test of our skills, it was a test of our will. And we passed. Every one of you gave everything you had to keep this ship alive, and because of that, we're still here. Her eyes sweep across the room, meeting each of theirs in turn. I know you're tired. I know this feels impossible, but we've come too far to give up now. We've survived the worst, and we'll survive what's next, together. Her words hang in the air, a fragile thread of hope weaving through the crew. Slowly, heads lift and shoulders straighten. The weight of their exhaustion remains, but there's a spark of resilience flickering to life. Kale watches her from across the deck, a faint nod of respect in his expression. For all their differences, he recognizes the strength in her leadership, the way she can inspire even in the darkest moments. But as the crew begins to rally, Elara's thoughts turn to the challenges ahead. The ship is barely holding together, its systems hanging by a thread. The star's pull still lingers, a constant reminder of how precarious their situation remains. She knows this fragile unity is all that stands between them and oblivion. The road ahead is uncertain, but for now, they've bought themselves a chance. And in the vast, unforgiving expanse of space, that's more than most could hope for. The command deck falls silent again, the crew's renewed resolve a quiet but powerful force. Ellara takes a moment to steady herself, her gaze fixed on the star's fading light. They've survived this storm, but the journey is far from over, and as the ship drifts forward, its battered hull carrying them toward an uncertain future, she knows one thing for certain: they'll face whatever comes next, not as individuals, but as a crew. Together, the ship glides silently through the void, its battered hull a testament to the trials they've endured. The crew moves with quiet purpose, their exhaustion tempered by the grim reality of their situation. The life support systems are faltering, their hum reduced to a faint, irregular pulse. The air grows thinner, each breath a reminder of how little time they have left. Ellara stands at the center of the command deck, her eyes scanning the damage reports with a mix of frustration and resolve. The numbers don't lie. They are running out of everything. Air, power, time. Her gaze drifts to the observation deck, where the faint glow of an asteroid field glimmers in the distance. It's a chaotic, unpredictable expanse, but it's also their only shot at survival. She turns to the crew, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. "We need resources," she says, her tone steady but urgent. "That asteroid field is our best chance. If we can harvest what we need, we might just make it." The room falls silent, the weight of her words sinking in. The crew exchanges uneasy glances, their faces a mix of skepticism and fear. Asteroids are dangerous, their surfaces riddled with volatile compounds and unpredictable gravitational fields. Venturing into that chaos feels like trading one death sentence for another. Kale steps forward, his voice breaking the tension. "She's right," he says, his tone firm. "We don't have a choice. If we stay here, we're done out there. At least we've got a chance." His words are blunt, but they carry a quiet conviction that resonates with the crew. They've seen his expertise in action, and while his methods are unorthodox, they've worked before. Still, hesitation lingers. The risks are undeniable, and the crew's weariness makes the prospect of another battle seem almost unbearable. Ellara feels their doubt, their fear, and she knows she needs to bridge the gap between hope and despair. "I won't lie to you," she says, her voice softer now. "This won't be easy, but we've faced impossible odds before, and we've come out the other side. This time won't be any different." Her words are met with silence, but it's a different kind of silence, less resistant, more contemplative. Slowly, the crew begins to nod, their resolve hardening as they weigh the risks against the alternative. There's no enthusiasm, no rallying cry, just a quiet acceptance of what needs to be done. With the crew's reluctant agreement, Ellara turns to the navigation console, her hands moving swiftly as she plots a course for the asteroid field. Each keystroke feels like a step into the unknown, a gamble with no guarantee of success. The ship lurches forward, its engines groaning in protest as it changes direction. The asteroid field looms larger on the view screen, its jagged rocks and swirling debris a stark reminder of the danger ahead. Kale joins her at the console, his presence a silent show of solidarity. Together, they work in tense silence, their focus unbroken as they prepare for what's to come. The tension between them lingers, a quiet undercurrent of unresolved conflict, but for now, it's eclipsed by the urgency of their mission. As the ship draws closer to the asteroids, the crew braces themselves for the challenges ahead. The air grows heavier, charged with a mix of fear and determination. Ellara feels the weight of their trust pressing down on her, a reminder that every decision she makes carries the weight of their lives. They've survived the star's fury, but this is a different kind of battle. One that will test not just their skills, but their will to keep going. The asteroid field stretches before them, a chaotic maze of rock and shadow. Somewhere within it lies the key to their survival, but finding it will require more than just luck. It will require courage, ingenuity, and a unity that's been tested time and again. Ellara takes a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the swirling debris ahead. This is their chance, their last, best chance, and she'll be damned if they don't take it. The ship's engines hum faintly as it edges into the asteroid field, the jagged rocks looming like silent sentinels in the void. The crew watches in tense silence, their breaths shallow as the first fragments of debris ping against the hull. Ellara grips the helm, her fingers steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. The asteroid field is a labyrinth of danger, sharp edges, unpredictable gravitational forces, and pockets of volatile gases that could ignite at the slightest spark. Her voice cuts through the tension, calm but commanding. Stay sharp. We're looking for anything with usable minerals, iron, carbon, anything that can keep us alive. The crew springs into action, their movements sharp and focused. Scanners sweep the area, their faint beeps a constant reminder of how much is at stake. Kale monitors the readings, his brow furrowed as he identifies potential targets. There, he says suddenly, pointing to a cluster of asteroids on the display. That one's rich in iron. If we can break it down, we might get enough to stabilize the life support systems. The crew exchanges cautious glances, their hope tempered by the knowledge of how difficult extraction will be. Ellara maneuvers the ship closer, her hands moving with precision as she navigates the treacherous terrain. The asteroid looms larger on the view screen, its surface pockmarked and uneven. Prepare the mining drones, she orders, her voice steady. We'll need to work fast. Every second we spend here increases the risk. The crew scrambles to deploy the drones, their movements fueled by a mix of urgency and determination. But as the drones attach to the asteroid and begin drilling, the ship shudders violently. A jagged fragment, dislodged by the mining process, collides with the hull. The impact reverberates through the deck, sending sparks flying from the damaged systems. Alarms blare, piercing the tense silence. Hull breach on deck 3. A crew member shouts, their voice tinged with panic. Elara's heart pounds as she assesses the damage. The breach is small but growing, the ship's atmosphere leaking into the void. "Seal it," she commands, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. The crew moves with practiced efficiency, their fear momentarily pushed aside as they work to contain the damage. Kale leads the effort, his hands steady as he reinforces the compromised section with emergency plating. The ship groans under the strain, its systems protesting the sudden shift in pressure. Minutes stretch into what feels like hours as the crew battles to stabilize the ship. Finally, the breach is sealed, the alarms falling silent. The air grows still, thick with the weight of what they've just endured. Ellara exhales sharply, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she releases the helm. "Status report," she demands, her voice firm but edged with exhaustion. The crew responds in unison, their voices a mix of relief and weariness. The hull is secure, the drones have completed their extraction, and the asteroid's resources are safely aboard. It's a hard-won victory, one that leaves them battered but not broken. Ellara surveys the deck, her gaze lingering on each face. "You did well," she says quietly, her tone softer now. "But this isn't over. We've got what we need to survive now, we have to make it count." As the ship pulls away from the asteroid field, the crew begins to regroup. The tension that once filled the air begins to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. They've faced the impossible and come out the other side, their unity stronger for it. Ellara watches the asteroids fade into the distance, their jagged forms a reminder of how close they came to disaster. But for the first time in what feels like forever, she allows herself to believe they might actually make it. The road ahead is still uncertain, but they've proven something to themselves, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they can endure. Together, the ship's corridors buzz with renewed energy as the crew sets to work, the newly harvested resources fueling a sense of purpose. The air smells faintly of metal and ozone, a testament to the repairs underway. Ellara moves through the chaos, her presence a calming force amidst the clatter of tools and hum of machinery. She pauses at a workbench where Kale is bent over a cracked control panel, his hands deftly rerouting circuits. Their eyes meet briefly, and for the first time, there's no tension, just a shared understanding of what needs to be done. "We've got enough iron to reinforce the hull," Kale says, his voice steady but tinged with relief. "And the carbon should stabilize the life support systems for now." He glances up at her, his expression softening. "It's not perfect, but it's a start." Ellara nods, her gaze drifting to the crew as they work together, their earlier exhaustion giving way to determination. The sight brings a flicker of pride, but it's overshadowed by a gnawing unease. She's always led with confidence, but the weight of her decisions, the risks she's taken, the lives she's gambled, lingers like a shadow. It's a burden she's carried silently, but as the repairs progress, the silence becomes harder to bear. Later, in the quiet of the observation deck, Ellara finds herself staring at the distant stars, their cold light a stark contrast to the warmth of the crew's camaraderie. Kale joins her, his presence a quiet comfort. For a moment, neither speaks, the hum of the ship filling the silence. Then, almost without thinking, Ellara breaks it. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Her voice is soft, almost hesitant, a rare crack in her usual composure. Kale looks at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" She hesitates, her fists clenching at her sides. Every decision I make, every order I give, it feels like I'm gambling with their lives. What if I'm wrong? What if I lead us into something we can't come back from? Her words hang in the air, raw and unfiltered. It's a confession she's kept buried, but here, in the quiet, it spills out. Kale studies her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he steps closer, his voice low but firm. You're not wrong, Ellara. You've gotten us this far, and that's not luck. It's because you're willing to make the hard calls when no one else will. He pauses, his gaze steady. But you don't have to carry it alone. That's what the crew is for. That's what I'm for. His words catch her off guard, and for a moment, she doesn't know how to respond. The weight of his trust, his unwavering support, is both a relief and a challenge. She's spent so long trying to be the unshakable leader, the one who never falters, that she's forgotten what it feels like to lean on someone else. The silence stretches, but it's not uncomfortable. Instead, it feels like a turning point, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that's grown between them. Kale doesn't push, doesn't demand more than she's willing to give. He simply stands beside her, a steady presence in the chaos. As the ship hums around them, Ellara feels a flicker of something she hasn't felt in a long time: hope. Not just for their survival, but for the strength they've found in each other. The journey ahead is still fraught with danger, but for the first time, she doesn't feel like she has to face it alone. The crew's laughter echoes faintly from the corridors, a reminder of the resilience they've shown. Ellara takes a deep breath, her shoulders straightening as she turns back to the stars. They've come so far, and they're not done yet. Together, they'll face whatever comes next, not as individuals but as a team, and that, she realizes, might just be enough. The ship's sensors emit a faint, rhythmic beep, breaking the quiet hum of the command deck. Elara's attention snaps to the console, her eyes narrowing as she studies the readings. A signal, faint but unmistakable, pulses in the distance, its origin unclear. Her first instinct is caution. They've come too far to risk everything on an unknown variable. But as the signal repeats, a flicker of hope stirs within her. Could it be another ship? A lifeline in the endless void? Kale notices the change in her expression and steps closer, his voice low but urgent. We should check it out, he says, his tone leaving no room for doubt. It could be our only shot at rescue, or at least a chance to replenish what we've lost. His words are pragmatic, but there's an edge of excitement beneath them, a spark of possibility. Ellara hesitates, her mind racing through the risks. Diverting course could drain their already limited resources, and if the signal turns out to be nothing, or worse, a trap, it could cost them everything. But the alternative is equally bleak, drifting aimlessly through the void, waiting for their systems to fail. She glances at the crew, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. They're watching her, waiting for her decision, their trust a heavy weight on her shoulders. The debate is short but tense. Some crew members argue for caution, their voices tinged with exhaustion and fear. Others, emboldened by Kale's optimism, urge her to take the risk. The room feels charged, the air thick with unspoken tension. Ellara listens, her expression unreadable, but her mind is already made up. We'll investigate, she says finally, her voice firm. but we proceed with caution. If anything feels off, we pull back immediately. The crew nods, their relief and anxiety mingling in equal measure. Kale gives her a brief, approving nod before turning to the navigation console. The ship shifts course, its engines groaning softly as it moves toward the source of the signal. The journey is tense, the crew working in near silence as they monitor the readings. The signal grows stronger with each passing moment, its rhythm steady and deliberate. But as they draw closer, a strange unease settles over the deck, a quiet but persistent sense of foreboding. Ellara stands at the helm, her gaze fixed on the view screen. The signal's origin is still unclear, nothing but a faint blip in the vast expanse of space. But something about it feels off. The crew feels it too, their movements growing more hesitant as the tension builds. Kale breaks the silence, his voice calm but edged with unease. "It's not a distress signal," he says, his eyes scanning the data. "It's too regular. Like it's designed to draw us in." His words hang in the air, a chilling reminder of the dangers they've faced before. Elara's jaw tightens, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But they're too close now, the signal too strong to ignore. She glances at the crew, their faces a mix of fear and determination. They've followed her this far, and she won't abandon them now. "Stay alert," she says, her voice steady but firm. "We'll approach, but we're not committing until we know what we're dealing with." The ship edges forward, the tension on the deck palpable. The signal's rhythm grows louder, more insistent, its origin still shrouded in mystery. The crew braces themselves, their hands hovering over controls and scanners, ready for whatever comes next. Ellara feels the weight of their trust pressing down on her, a reminder that every decision she makes carries the weight of their lives. As the ship closes in on the signal, the unease deepens, a quiet but growing sense that they're walking into something far more dangerous than they anticipated. But for now, there's no turning back. The signal pulses on, a beacon in the darkness, and Ellara knows that whatever lies ahead, they'll face it together. The signal grows stronger as the ship approaches, its rhythmic pulse now a steady thrum in the background. On the view screen, a derelict space station comes into view, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the faint glow of distant stars. The station's lights flicker sporadically, casting jagged shadows across its battered hull. It's a haunting sight, one that sends a shiver down Elara's spine. She turns to the crew, her voice calm but firm. "We're going in. Small team. Kale, Jara, and Rin, you're with me. The rest of you, stay on the ship and keep the systems stable. If anything feels off, you pull us back immediately." The team suits up in silence, the weight of the unknown pressing heavily on them. As the airlock hisses open, the cold void of space greets them, its silence unnerving. The station looms ahead, its docking bay barely visible through the flickering lights. Ellara takes the lead, her movements deliberate as she guides the team across the narrow gap. The station's interior is a maze of dim corridors, the air stale and heavy with the scent of decay. The walls are lined with scorch marks and shattered panels, signs of a struggle long past. Kale scans the area with a handheld device, his brow furrowed as he reads the data. Power's barely functional, he mutters, enough to keep the lights on, but not much else. The team moves cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Every shadow seems to shift, every flicker of light a potential threat. Jara, the team's medic, stays close to Ellara, her eyes darting nervously as she clutches her medkit. Rin, the youngest of the group, keeps a hand on his sidearm, his normally calm demeanor replaced by tense vigilance. In one of the station's control rooms, they find a data terminal, its screen cracked but still faintly glowing. Ellara kneels beside it, her fingers flying across the interface as she works to access the logs. The files are fragmented, corrupted by time and neglect, but what remains is enough to paint a grim picture. There was some kind of event here, she says, her voice low. A catastrophic failure, maybe an experiment gone wrong. The logs mention a containment breach, but the details aren't unclear. Kale leans in, his expression darkening as he reads the fragmented entries. Whatever happened here, it wasn't natural. They were trying to contain something, and it looks like they failed. The words hang in the air, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the unknown. As they continue to explore, the tension grows thicker, the station's silence pressing down on them like a physical weight. Then, faint but unmistakable, a noise echoes through the corridor, a soft, metallic clang, like something moving in the shadows. The team freezes, their breath catching in their throats. Ellara signals for silence, her hand hovering near her weapon as she scans the darkness. The noise comes again, closer this time, and the team's nerves are stretched to the breaking point. Kale takes a step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not alone here." The words send a jolt of adrenaline through the group, their earlier caution giving way to a heightened sense of alertness. The station, once a silent tomb, now feels alive with unseen threats. Elara's mind races as she weighs their options. They need answers, but the risks are mounting with every step. The team moves forward, their movements slow and deliberate. The station's secrets are close, but so is the danger. The faint noise lingers in the air, a constant reminder that they're not just exploring the past, they're walking into something far more immediate. And as they press deeper into the station's labyrinthine corridors, one thing becomes clear. Whatever happened here, it's not over. Not yet. The metallic clang grows louder, echoing through the station's dim corridors. Ellara signals for the team to halt, her hand raised in a silent command. The sound seems to come from behind a heavy, sealed door at the end of the passage. The air feels heavier here, charged with an almost palpable tension. Kale steps forward, his scanner humming faintly as he examines the door's control panel. "It's locked," he murmurs, his voice low, but there's power running through it enough to suggest something's still active on the other side. Elara's gaze sweeps over the door, her instincts warring with caution. "We don't know what's in there," she says, her voice steady but edged with unease. "For all we know, it could be a trap." Kale turns to her, his expression intense. "Or it could be someone who needs our help. We can't just walk away." His words hang in the air, a quiet challenge that forces her to weigh their options. The team watches silently, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. After a moment, Ellara nods, her decision made. "Open it, but stay sharp." Kale works quickly, his hands moving with practiced precision as he bypasses the door's security protocols. With a low hiss, The door slides open, revealing a small, dimly lit chamber. Inside, a single cryopod sits at the center, its surface frosted over and faintly glowing. The pod's display flickers weakly, indicating that its systems are barely functional. Ellara approaches cautiously, her breath fogging in the cold air. The pod's occupant is a human figure, their features obscured by the frost. Her heart pounds as she studies the readings. "They're alive," she says quietly, her voice tinged with disbelief. Barely, the pod's failing. It won't hold much longer. Kale steps closer, his expression softening. "We have to wake them," he says, his tone firm but not unkind. "We can't just leave them here." Ellara hesitates, her mind racing through the risks. Waking the survivor could bring unforeseen complications. What if they're hostile? What if they're infected with whatever caused the station's downfall? But the thought of leaving someone to die alone in the cold void is a weight she can't ignore. "Do it," she says finally, her voice quiet but resolute. Kale moves to the pod's controls, his hands steady despite the tension in the room. The pod hisses as it begins the awakening process, its systems groaning under the strain. The frost melts away, revealing the face of a woman, her features pale and drawn. Her eyes flutter open, disoriented and unfocused. Where am I?" She whispers, her voice hoarse and barely audible. Ellara kneels beside the pod, her tone calm but urgent. "You're safe. You're on a derelict station. We found you in cryo sleep. Can you tell us what happened here?" The woman's eyes widen as memories seem to flood back. She struggles to sit up, her movements weak and unsteady. "They came out of nowhere," she says, her voice trembling. "We didn't even see them, just shadows. They took everyone. I barely made it to the pod." Her words send a chill through the room, the team exchanging uneasy glances. Elara's mind races as she processes the survivor's words. "Shadows? What do you mean?" The woman shakes her head, her expression haunted. "I don't know. They moved too fast. Like they weren't really there, but they were real. They destroyed everything." The team falls silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a shroud. Kale steps forward, his voice low. "We need to get out of here, now." Ellara nods, her earlier caution giving way to urgency. "Jara, help her. Rin, watch our backs. Kale, lead the way." As they move back toward the docking bay, the tension in the air thickens. The station, once silent, now feels alive with unseen threats. The survivor clings to Jara, her steps faltering but determined. Elara's grip tightens on her weapon, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The team moves quickly but cautiously, their breaths shallow and their nerves on edge. The docking bay looms ahead, its lights flickering weakly, but as they approach, a faint noise echoes behind them, a soft, scraping sound, like something dragging across the metal floor. The team freezes, their hearts pounding in unison. Ellara glances back, her eyes narrowing as she scans the dim corridor. "Move," she whispers, her voice barely audible. Now, the team breaks into a run, their footsteps echoing through the station's empty halls. The survivor stumbles, but Jara keeps her steady, their progress slowed by her weakened state. The scraping sound grows louder, closer, and Elara's instincts scream at her to hurry. They're almost to the ship, when a shadow moves in the corner of her vision, too fast to make out, but undeniably there. Kale reaches the airlock first, his hands flying across the controls to open it. The team piles in, their breaths ragged as the door slides shut behind them. The survivor collapses against the wall, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. Ellara leans against the door, her heart pounding as she listens for any sign of pursuit. The ship's engines roar to life, and the station begins to shrink on the view screen as they pull away, but the sense of relief is short-lived. The survivor's words echo in Elara's mind, a grim reminder of the danger they've narrowly escaped. Whatever happened on that station, it's clear they're not alone, and as the ship speeds away into the void, one question lingers: what, or who, is still out there, waiting in the shadows? The airlock seals with a resounding hiss, the sound echoing through the ship as the team returns to the relative safety of their vessel. The survivor, still trembling, leans heavily on Jara as they make their way to the medbay. Her voice is weak but urgent, her words cutting through the silence. "You have to get out of here," she whispers, her eyes wide with fear. "They're still out there, watching, waiting. If they find you, they'll tear this ship apart." Elara's jaw tightens as she absorbs the warning. She turns to the crew, her tone calm but commanding. "We need to be ready. Activate the ship's defenses and monitor all systems. If anything moves out there, I want to know immediately." The crew springs into action, their earlier relief replaced by a renewed sense of urgency. The ship's shields hum to life, their faint glow a reassuring sign of protection. Weapons systems are brought online, their targeting arrays sweeping the void for any sign of movement. Hours pass, the tension on the command deck growing thicker with each uneventful minute. The crew's initial alertness begins to wane, their movements slowing as fatigue sets in. Even Kale, usually unshakable, leans heavily against a console, his eyes scanning the readings with less focus. But Ellara remains steadfast, her gaze fixed on the view screen. The survivor's warning lingers in her mind, a quiet but persistent voice urging her to stay vigilant. The quiet is shattered without warning. A sudden, blinding energy pulse slams into the ship, its force rippling through the hull like a shockwave. The command deck is thrown into chaos, consoles sparking, and alarms blaring as the lights flicker wildly. Ellara grabs the edge of the console to steady herself, her voice cutting through the din. "Report what just hit us." Kale is already at the engineering station, his hands flying across the controls. "The engines are down," he shouts, his voice strained. "Whatever that was, it fried half our systems. Shields are holding, but barely." The ship lurches, its artificial gravity struggling to compensate for the damage. The crew scrambles to stabilize the situation, their movements frantic but purposeful. Elara's mind races as she assesses the situation. The energy pulse wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was deliberate. The unknown force the survivor warned them about has found them. She glances at the view screen, her eyes narrowing as she scans the void. There's no sign of an attacker, no ship or weapon visible. But the pulse came from somewhere, and she knows it's only a matter of time before the next strike. "Get those engines back online," she orders, her voice firm despite the chaos. "And keep scanning the area. If something's out there, we We need to find it before it hits us again. The crew obeys, their movements sharp and focused as they work to restore the ship's systems. Kale works furiously at the engineering console, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We've got a power surge in the main conduits," he mutters. "If we don't stabilize it, we could lose life support." Elara's instincts scream at her to act, but she forces herself to remain calm. The crew needs a steady hand now more than ever. She steps forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Reroute auxiliary power to the life support systems. Kale, focus on the engines. We need to get out of here as soon as possible." The ship groans under the strain, its systems pushed to their limits. The crew works tirelessly, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten as they fight to keep the ship intact. But as the minutes stretch on, the tension grows unbearable. The unknown force remains hidden, its presence felt but unseen. The question lingers in the air, unspoken but undeniable. What, or who, is out there, and what do they want? Elara's gaze remains fixed on the view screen, her mind racing through the possibilities. The survivor's warning echoes in her thoughts, a grim reminder of the danger they're facing. The crew's unity is their greatest strength, but even that might not be enough against an enemy they can't see. The ship's systems continue to falter, their faint hum a constant reminder of how precarious their situation is. As the crew works to stabilize the ship, Ellara feels the weight of their trust pressing down on her. They've faced impossible odds before, but this is different. This enemy is unlike anything they've encountered, its motives and methods shrouded in mystery. But one thing is clear, they can't afford to let their guard down. Not now, not ever. The ship's lights flicker once more, casting long shadows across the command deck. The crew's movements are sharp and purposeful, their determination unwavering. But as the void outside looms large and unyielding, Ellara knows one thing for certain. The fight is far from over, and whatever comes next, they'll face it together. The ship shudders violently as another energy pulse ripples through its fragile hull, the lights flickering before plunging the command deck into near total darkness. Emergency panels cast a faint, eerie glow, illuminating the crew's tense faces as they scramble to stabilize the failing systems. Ellara grips the edge of the console, her mind racing. "Status report," she calls out, her voice cutting through the chaos. Kale's response is grim. "Engines are down, shields are at 10%. If we take another hit like that, we're done." His hands move swiftly across the controls, but the readings offer little hope. The ship groans under the strain, its once reliable systems now on the brink of collapse. The crew works frantically, their movements sharp but increasingly desperate. In the midst of the chaos, the survivor stumbles onto the command deck, her face pale but determined. "You have to shut it all down," she says, her voice trembling but urgent. "They're drawn to energy signatures. The more you use, the easier it is for them to find you. If you want to survive, you need to go dark." Elara's eyes narrow as she processes the survivor's words. "Go dark," she repeats, her tone wary. "You're saying we shut down everything?" The survivor nods, her expression pleading. "It's the only way. You'll be invisible to them. Just another shadow in the void, but you have to act fast." They're already close, Kale steps forward, his brow furrowed. If we shut everything down, we'll lose life support. We'll be sitting ducks. His voice is calm, but there's an edge of urgency beneath it. Ellara glances at the crew, their faces a mix of fear and exhaustion. The idea of plunging the ship into complete silence feels like a death sentence, but the alternative, another devastating energy pulse, is unthinkable. She takes a deep breath, her decision made. Do it, she says, her voice firm. Shut down all non-essential systems, now. The crew hesitates for only a moment before obeying, their movements sharp but deliberate. One by one, the ship's systems power down lights, sensors, even the faint hum of the artificial gravity. The command deck falls into an oppressive silence, the air growing colder with each passing second. The only sound is the faint, rhythmic breathing of the crew as they wait in the darkness, their nerves stretched to the breaking point. Ellara stands at the center of the deck, her eyes fixed on the view screen. The void outside is pitch black, the stars faint pinpricks of light in an endless sea of nothingness. Somewhere out there, the unknown force lingers, its presence felt but unseen. The tension is unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity as they wait for a sign, any sign, that their plan has worked. Kale moves to her side, his voice barely above a whisper. This is a gamble, he says, his tone low. If they find us, they won't. Ellara interrupts, her voice steady but quiet. We've faced worse than this. We'll make it through. Her words are firm, but the doubt lingers, a quiet whisper in the back of her mind. The crew's trust is a heavy weight, and she knows that every decision she makes carries the weight of their lives. The minutes drag on, the silence pressing down on them like a physical force. The crew remains still, their breaths shallow, and their eyes darting nervously toward the view screen. The survivor sits in the corner, her face pale but determined, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside. And then, faint but unmistakable, a shadow moves across the view screen, a shape too large and too fast to be natural. Elara's heart pounds as she watches, her instincts screaming at her to act, but she remains still, her voice a barely audible whisper. Hold your positions. Don't move. The shadow pauses, its form shifting and undulating as if searching for something. The crew holds their breath, their fear palpable. For a moment, it seems as though the shadow will pass them by, disappearing into the void as quickly as it came. But then, with a sudden, violent jolt, the ship shudders, the shadow lashing out with a blinding energy pulse that misses them by mere meters. The crew flinches, their fear giving way to a quiet determination. The gamble has worked, for now, but the danger is far from over. The shadow lingers, its presence a constant reminder of the threat they face. Elara's gaze remains fixed on the view screen, her mind racing through the possibilities. They've bought themselves time, but the fight is far from over. And in the cold, silent void, one thing is clear. They'll need more than just darkness to survive. The hours stretch on, each one heavier than the last. The ship remains cloaked in darkness, its systems silent and its crew huddled together in the cold command deck. The oppressive silence is broken only by the occasional creak of the hull, or the faint sound of someone shifting uncomfortably. Ellara stands at the center of it all, her posture rigid but her mind churning with uncertainty. The crew's faces are pale and drawn, their earlier determination giving way to exhaustion and despair. Even Kale, usually a bastion of unshakable resolve, sits slumped against a console, his eyes distant. Ellara tries to rally them, her voice steady but softer than usual. "We've faced worse than this," she says, her words meant to inspire but falling flat in the heavy air. "We're still here. That means something." The crew glances at her, their expressions a mix of gratitude and doubt. They want to believe her, but the weight of their situation is crushing. The unknown force still lurks outside, its presence a constant, unspoken threat. The survivors' warning echoes in their minds, a grim reminder of how little they know about the danger they're facing. Kale breaks the silence, his voice low but insistent. "We can't just sit here and wait for something to happen. We've got to do something." He gestures toward the ship's control panel, its faint glow barely illuminating his face. "We've got enough power left to send a distress signal. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing." The crew murmurs uneasily, the suggestion sparking a flicker of hope, but also deep-seated fear. Elara's jaw tightens as she considers the idea. "If we send a signal, we risk drawing them to us," she says, her tone cautious. "We'd be lighting a beacon in the dark, and we don't know who or what might answer." The crew is divided, their voices rising in quiet debate. Some argue for the signal, clinging to the slim chance of rescue. Others shake their heads, their fear of the unknown outweighing their desperation. Ellara listens, her expression unreadable, but the weight of their uncertainty presses heavily on her. She's always led with confidence, but now, standing in the dim light of the command deck, she feels the cracks in her resolve. The crew looks to her for answers, and for the first time, she's not sure she has them. Finally, she steps forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "We're running out of time," she says, her tone firm but quiet. "If we do nothing, we're already lost. Sending the signal is a risk, but it's the only chance we've got." The crew falls silent, their eyes fixed on her. She takes a deep breath, her decision made. Prepare the signal. We'll send it on a narrow frequency, something that might reach help before it reaches them. Kale nods, his hands already moving across the controls. The ship's systems hum faintly as power is rerouted, the faint glow of the control panel growing slightly brighter. The crew watches in tense silence as the signal is prepared, their breaths shallow and their nerves on edge. Ellara stands at the helm, her gaze fixed on the view screen. The void outside is as dark and unforgiving as ever, but somewhere out there, someone might hear their call. The signal goes out, a faint pulse of light and sound, traveling through the vast emptiness of space. The crew waits in silence, their hope fragile but alive. The minutes stretch on, each one longer than the last. The tension is unbearable, the weight of their gamble pressing down on them like a physical force. Elara's hands clench at her sides, her mind racing through the possibilities. The signal could mean rescue, or it could mean their end. But for now, all they can do is wait. The darkness outside looms large, its mysteries as vast and unknowable as ever. The crew sits together, their unity a quiet but powerful force. They've faced the impossible before, and they'll face it again. But as the void stretches on, silent and unyielding, one question lingers in the air. Will help come in time? Or will the shadows find them first? The silence of the void is shattered by a faint tremor rippling through the ship's hull. Elara's eyes snap to the view screen, her breath catching as a dark silhouette emerges on the horizon. The enemy ship is unmistakable, its jagged, angular design cutting through the darkness like a predator closing in. The crew freezes, their earlier exhaustion replaced by a surge of adrenaline. Elara's voice cuts through the tension, sharp and commanding. Battle stations. This is it. Prepare for a final stand. The crew moves with practiced precision, their earlier despair giving way to grim determination. Weapons systems are brought online, their faint hum a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had enveloped the ship moments before. Kale works furiously at the engineering console, his hands flying across the controls. Shields are at 20%, he reports, his voice tight. We're not going to last long if they hit us hard. Ellara nods, her gaze fixed on the approaching enemy. Her mind races through their dwindling options, each one more desperate than the last. As the enemy ship draws closer, its massive form looms larger on the view screen, its dark silhouette casting an ominous shadow over the crew. The tension on the command deck is palpable, every breath shallow and every movement deliberate. Elara's voice breaks the silence, low but firm. We've faced worse than this, she says, her words meant to steady the crew. We're still here, that means something. The crew nods, their resolve hardening as they brace for what's to come. But just as the enemy ship enters firing range, a faint blip appears on the radar. Elara's eyes narrow as she studies the readings. What is that? She murmurs, her voice edged with curiosity. The blip grows stronger, accompanied by a faint but unmistakable signal. Kale's voice cuts through the tension, his tone tinged with disbelief. It's a fleet allied ships. They're responding to our distress call. The crew erupts in cheers, their relief spilling over in a wave of laughter and shouts. On the view screen, the Allied fleet emerges from the darkness, their sleek, silver ships cutting through the void with precision and purpose. The enemy ship hesitates, its massive form slowing as it registers the new threat. For a moment, it seems as though the enemy might press the attack, but then, with a sudden burst of energy, it turns and retreats, disappearing into the void as quickly as it came. The command deck falls silent, the weight of what just happened sinking in. Ellara collapses against the console, her strength finally giving way. The relief is overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion that leaves her breathless. The crew gathers around her, their faces a mix of joy and disbelief. They've done it. They've survived the impossible. But even as the crew celebrates, Elara's mind is elsewhere. The journey has changed them all, leaving scars that run deeper than the damage to the ship. They've faced the unknown, stared into the abyss, and come out the other side, but not without cost. The survivor's warning, the shadow's relentless pursuit, the weight of every decision. It's all etched into her mind, a reminder of how fragile their survival truly is. Kale steps forward, his voice breaking the silence. We made it, he says, his tone quiet but firm. But this isn't over, not yet. Ellara nods, her gaze drifting to the view screen. The Allied ships hover in the distance, their lights a reassuring presence in the darkness. But beyond them, the void stretches on, vast and unknowable. The journey has changed them, but it's also shown them what they're capable of. Together, they've faced the impossible and lived to tell the tale. As the crew begins to regroup, their laughter and chatter filling the command deck, Ellara allows herself a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead is still uncertain, but for now, they've earned a moment of peace. The stars outside shine brighter than ever, their light a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, hope can still be found. And as the ship drifts forward, its battered hull carrying them toward an uncertain future, Ellara knows one thing for certain: whatever comes next, they'll face it together. The Allied ships glide into formation around the battered vessel, their sleek silver hulls a stark contrast to the scars and scorch marks that mar the crew's ship. The tension on the command deck eases, replaced by a quiet, almost reverent relief. Ellara stands at the helm, her gaze fixed on the view screen as the dying star shrinks into a faint crimson speck in the distance. Its light, once haunting and oppressive, now feels distant, almost insignificant, a reminder of how far they've come. She exhales slowly, the weight of the past hours settling heavily on her shoulders. Her thoughts drift to the crew, their faces etched with exhaustion, but also a quiet pride. They've faced the unimaginable and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. She glances at Kale, who stands nearby, his usual intensity softened by a rare smile. He catches her eye and nods, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they've shared. The tension between them, once a source of friction, now feels like a thread that binds them together, a testament to the trust they've built in the face of adversity. The crew moves with a sense of purpose, their earlier despair replaced by a quiet determination. They've survived, but the scars of their ordeal remain not just on the ship, but on each of them. Ellara feels it too, a quiet ache that lingers beneath the surface. Leadership has always been her strength, but now, more than ever, she understands its cost. The sacrifices made, the decisions weighed, the lives entrusted to her care. It's a burden she carries with quiet resolve. As the Allied ships guide them toward safety, Ellara allows herself a rare moment of reflection. She thinks of the survivor they rescued, now resting in the med bay, her haunted eyes a reminder of the horrors they've faced. She thinks of the shadowy force that pursued them, its motives still shrouded in mystery. And she thinks of the crew, their resilience, their unity, their quiet strength. They've become more than just a team. They've become a family, bound together by shared trials and unspoken truths. The dying star fades completely from view, its crimson light replaced by the steady glow of distant stars. Ellara closes her eyes, the hum of the ship's engines a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. The journey has changed her, reshaped her in ways she's only beginning to understand. Leadership isn't just about making the hard calls. It's about carrying the weight of those decisions, about finding strength in the face of uncertainty. And as she stands there, surrounded by the crew she's fought so hard to protect, she feels a quiet sense of peace. But even as the tension eases, she knows this isn't the end. The void is vast and unknowable, its mysteries as infinite as the stars themselves. The shadowy force that pursued them is still out there, its intentions unclear but undeniably threatening. The journey ahead is uncertain, fraught with challenges they can't yet imagine. Yet as Ellara opens her eyes, Her resolve hardens. They faced the impossible and survived. Whatever comes next, they'll face it together. The crew gathers around her, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. They look to her not just as their captain, but as their anchor, a steady presence in the chaos. Ellara meets their gaze, her voice calm but firm. "We've made it this far," she says, her words carrying the weight of their shared experience. "And no matter what comes next, we'll keep going." Together, the crew nods, their unity a quiet but powerful force. The ship hums softly as it travels through the void, its battered hull a testament to their resilience. The stars outside shine brighter than ever, their light a reminder of the hope that persists even in the darkest corners of the universe. And as Ellara stands at the helm, her gaze fixed on the horizon, she knows one thing for certain: their journey is far from over, but they're ready for whatever lies ahead.